The road that led Chris Combs here was never straight. It twisted through hospital hallways, quiet family fears, late-night doubts, and a past that always seemed heavier than the body he carried. Long after the cameras wrapped on 1,000 Pounds Sisters Season 7, Chris was still waking up every morning with the same question pressing against his chest. How long can I keep this up? Years ago, when viewers first met him, Chris wasn't framed as the hero. He was simply another Slayton sibling fighting the same war as Tammy and Amy, a war against weight, against genetics, against habits built over decades. When he first appeared during Season 2, the scale told a brutal truth: more than 450 pounds. Every step hurt. Every movement came with calculation. And every doctor's appointment felt like a warning disguised as advice. Mobility wasn't guaranteed. Energy wasn't promised. Time wasn't unlimited. Chris lived with daily reminders that his body was working against him. Insulin shots became routine, not optional. His blood sugar dictated his schedule. His joints dictated his pace. And yet, beneath the jokes, beneath the easy smile fans would later come to love, there was fear. Deep, inherited fear. Because Chris had seen this story end before. His father had weighed over 400 pounds when he passed away, gone far too young, his life cut short before it ever slowed down. That memory haunted Chris in ways he rarely spoke about. It wasn't just grief, it was a mirror. A glimpse into a future that felt uncomfortably possible. And Chris refused to let that be the ending written for him. By the time Season 3 arrived, something in him shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but firmly. He didn't wake up suddenly fearless. He woke up tired of being afraid. Tired of watching his sisters struggle. Tired of worrying whether his grandchildren would remember him as strong, or simply as gone. So he made the decision that would change everything. Gastric sleeve surgery. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't easy. And it definitely wasn't instant. Recovery came with pain, discipline, and moments where quitting felt easier than continuing. But Chris did what few expected. He committed fully. Within a year, nearly 150 pounds were gone. The man who once struggled to walk short distances was moving freely again. Mobility returned. Breath returned. Hope returned. For the first time in years, Chris didn't feel trapped inside his own body. As the seasons rolled on, viewers watched him transform, not just physically, but emotionally. He became the family's anchor, the mediator, the calm voice in rooms full of chaos. When Tammy exploded, Chris grounded her. When Amy unraveled, Chris steadied her. He wasn't chasing the spotlight, he was holding the structure together. By the time Season 7 arrived, Chris had reached a weight that once felt impossible, around 250 pounds. Not only had he maintained the loss, he'd proven something even harder: consistency. He ran a 5K marathon, not for cameras, not for praise, but for himself. And yet, something felt different. Season 7 didn't linger on Chris the way earlier seasons had. His progress was no longer front and center. The milestones that once defined his arc passed quietly, almost unnoticed. Instead, the focus shifted elsewhere, toward Tammy's skin removal surgery, toward narrative balance, toward reshaping villains and heroes for television.
Chris didn't complain.
He never does. But fans noticed. They noticed how his journey, steady and disciplined, lacked the dramatic spikes producers often chase.
No meltdowns. No shocking reversals.
Just quiet success. And quiet success rarely screams on reality TV. Still, off-camera, Chris kept moving forward. He always had. Chris had learned long ago that consistency doesn't make noise. It doesn't crash through doors or demand applause. It shows up quietly, day after day, doing the same hard things even when no one is watching. That was the part of his journey most people never saw. The mornings without cameras, the evenings without encouragement, the private moments where the scale didn't move and the doubt crept back in. Season 7 might not have centered on his weight loss, but Chris never stopped carrying the weight of responsibility. He carried it for Tammy, especially. Her skin removal surgery became the emotional core of the season, and for good reason. Years of struggle, ridicule, and self-destruction had led her to that operating table. Chris stood beside her through every anxious moment, the consultations, the fears, the tears. He watched his sister reclaim her body in ways neither of them ever believed possible. But that shift came with a cost. The producers leaned into Tammy's redemption arc, reshaping her image from villain to survivor. To keep the balance of conflict alive, the narrative quietly pivoted. Amy became the pressure point, the source of tension, the one who absorbed the friction that reality TV thrives on. And in that reshuffling, Chris faded into the background. Not because his story ended, but because his story stabilized. And stability doesn't trend. Yet off-screen, Chris's life was expanding in ways the show couldn't fully capture. His marriage to Brittany remained solid, grounded in patience and shared struggle. Brittany had always been quieter than the rest of the family, but her presence mattered. She watched Chris fight for his health, and in doing so, she began to confront her own dreams, especially the one that had lived quietly in her heart for years. Motherhood. Brittany wanted a child more than anything. It wasn't a secret, it was just painful. Age, weight, and reproductive challenges had made that dream harder to reach with every passing year. She spoke honestly about it, without drama, without blame. She knew her body. She knew the risks. And she knew time wasn't something she had in abundance. Chris listened. He always did. They talked late at night about possibilities, about hope, about whether bariatric surgery might help Brittany the way it helped the rest of the family. But that decision came with its own reality: recovery time, hormonal changes, uncertainty. Choosing health could mean delaying motherhood even further. And yet, Brittany didn't hesitate. Because, like Chris, she understood something deeply. You can't build a future on a body that's struggling to survive the present. Rumors started to swirl online, whispers that Chris and Brittany had welcomed a baby. Fans dissected photos, analyzed captions, searched for clues. But the truth was simpler and heavier. There was no pregnancy announcement, no secret delivery. Just two people still waiting, still hoping, still choosing patience over fantasy. Chris, meanwhile, had taken on another role: grandfather. The responsibility didn't overwhelm him. It grounded him. It reminded him why he worked so hard to stay healthy, why he refused to slide backward, why every choice mattered. And when the cameras weren't rolling, something else was happening quietly, almost unnoticed. Chris was becoming lighter, not just in body but in spirit. By June 2025, that change was impossible to ignore. By the time the family stepped into the local meet and greet that summer, Chris barely resembled the man viewers first met years earlier. There was no dramatic reveal, no slow-motion walk, no swelling music, just a quiet, undeniable shift. He moved differently now, stood taller, smiled without reservation. The kind of smile that doesn't ask for approval because it no longer needs it. A black cap sat low on his head. A red t-shirt hung loosely over a frame that once carried far more weight. Fans lined up, phones in hand, excitement flickering across their faces as they recognized him. Chris signed autographs with ease, cracking jokes, shaking hands, making eye contact, the way someone does when they feel at home in their own skin. The videos spread quickly. Clips posted online captured something subtle but powerful. Chris wasn't just slimmer. He looked peaceful. Health had softened his edges instead of hardening him. There was a glow about him, one born not from vanity, but from relief. Relief that his body no longer fought him at every step. Beside him stood Brittany. She drew attention in a way she never had before. Leaner, brighter, confident in her posture and her smile. Fans who remembered her from season 7 barely recognized her. Comments flooded in: praise, disbelief, admiration. Some said she looked 10 years younger. Others said she looked happier than ever. And happiness, it turns out, photographs beautifully. What viewers didn't see in those short clips was the work behind that transformation. The discipline, the recalibration of habits, the quiet partnership between husband and wife, supporting each other without spectacle. Brittany's journey wasn't televised, but it was no less real, no less hard. The rumors returned, louder this time. People wanted to believe the glow meant pregnancy, that the long wait had finally ended. But again, the truth refused to match the fantasy. Britney wasn't expecting, not yet. What she was carrying instead was something just as important: momentum. She was considering bariatric surgery seriously now. Not impulsively. Not emotionally.
Thoughtfully.
With full awareness of what it could mean: delays, recovery, risks. And still, she leaned forward rather than away. Chris never pushed. He understood better than anyone that timing isn't something you force. It's something you meet when you're ready. Online, Chris's presence grew in a different way. While his Instagram wasn't flooded with daily posts, his Cameo profile told another story. Fans booked personalized messages for birthdays, anniversaries, moments of struggle, moments of joy. Chris showed up for all of it, offering humor, encouragement, honesty. His rating climbed. His popularity surged. Top 50 globally, outpacing names with louder scandals and bigger spotlights. Because Chris didn't sell chaos. He sold connection. A $50 message from Chris wasn't just a novelty. It felt personal, like advice from someone who had been where you were. Someone who didn't pretend the road was easy, but promised it was worth walking. And people listened. They trusted him. They saw themselves in him. Even as Season 7 faded into memory, Chris remained present in the lives of fans, announcing appearances, sharing gratitude, marking small moments that mattered. When he asked for prayers after the passing of his late mother's dog, the response was overwhelming. Tens of thousands of likes. Hundreds of comments. It wasn't about the dog. It was about empathy. Chris had become something rare in reality television, a constant. Not perfect. Not dramatic. Just real. And in a world addicted to spectacle, real endures. Long before the cameras ever followed him into doctors' offices or onto treadmill floors, Chris Combs had already lived with the shadow of an ending he didn't want. It wasn't abstract. It wasn't hypothetical. It had a face, his father's. A man who carried more than 400 pounds on his body and paid for it with years he never got to live. A man who didn't make it past his 40s. That knowledge settled into Chris early and never really left. Every ache in his knees, every short breath climbing a single flight of stairs, every insulin injection was a reminder that time was not neutral. It was watching, waiting. And unlike Tammy or Amy, whose battles were often loud and emotional, Chris carried his fear quietly. He joked through it, smiled through it. But beneath the humor was urgency. When he finally qualified for gastric sleeve surgery in Season 3, it wasn't framed as a miracle. It was framed as a decision, one made with clear eyes and no illusions. Surgery wouldn't save him. It would only give him a chance. What he did with that chance became the real story. The weight didn't fall off overnight. It came off slowly, stubbornly, pound by pound. Nearly 150 pounds in the first year. Enough to change how he moved through space. Enough to give him back his knees, his lungs, his future. He no longer needed daily insulin. He no longer feared walking across a parking lot. By Season 7, Chris wasn't chasing numbers anymore. He was maintaining, holding steady at around 250 pounds, a weight that allowed him to live rather than merely survive. He ran a 5K not because production asked him to, but because he could. Because his body allowed it. And oddly enough, that stability made him less interesting to the show. Reality television thrives on extremes. Collapse. Conflict. Transformation arcs that burn fast and bright. Chris had already done the hardest part, and what remained was consistency, the unglamorous, repetitive work of not going back. That doesn't make for explosive television. So the cameras drifted elsewhere. Tammy's skin removal surgery became the emotional centerpiece of Season 7, and rightfully so. It was the culmination of a journey that once seemed impossible. The edit softened her edges, reframing her from antagonist to survivor. The show needed balance, and that balance came at a cost. Amy became the chaos. And Chris, steady, grounded, progressing, slipped into the background. Some fans noticed. Many didn't. But those who had been watching closely understood that Chris's absence from the spotlight didn't mean his journey had stalled. It meant it had matured. There were no dramatic weigh-ins left.
No cliffhangers.
Just a man waking up every day and choosing not to undo years of work. That kind of discipline rarely gets applause. Off camera, his life expanded in quieter ways. Grandchildren filled his weekends. Family responsibilities multiplied. He became the one people leaned on emotionally, practically, spiritually. The mediator. The calm voice when arguments escalated. The reminder that not every conflict needed to explode to be addressed. Brittany saw all of it. She saw the toll and the triumph. The way his success didn't make him rigid or controlling, but softer, more patient. And as she wrestled with her own body, her own fertility struggles, her own timeline, Chris didn't rush her toward answers. He had learned that healing moves at its own pace. The question of children still hovered, unanswered, unresolved. Time was a factor. Biology was a factor. Surgery was a factor. None of it fit neatly into a storyline. And yet there was love.
There was partnership.
There was the shared understanding that life didn't have to check every box to be meaningful. Chris had already outrun one ending. Now he was writing something longer, something steadier, something that didn't need a season finale to feel complete. As the years passed, something else became clear about Chris Combs. His transformation was never just physical. The numbers on the scale mattered, yes, but they were only evidence of something deeper, a complete reorientation of how he moved through the world. Before the weight loss, his days were structured around limitation. How far could he walk? How long could he stand? How much energy would a simple errand cost him? Every choice carried a calculation. After surgery, those calculations slowly disappeared. Life became less about conserving strength and more about spending it. That shift changed his role within the family. Chris had always been the peacemaker, the one who softened arguments with humor and diffused tension before it ignited. But now he carried authority, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. When he spoke, people listened, not out of obligation, but respect. In group chats filled with sarcasm, frustration, and the occasional emotional explosion, Chris became this steady pulse. When Tammy and Amy clashed, his messages weren't loud, but they were consistent. Families pull together. Families don't abandon each other when things get hard. Families survive storms by standing in the same place, even when they disagree. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And Chris had learned to accept that too. Watching Amy struggle with her marriage, her mental health, her public mistakes, stirred something complicated in him. He wanted to protect her, wanted to shield her from the consequences of choices made under stress and exhaustion. But he also knew protection had limits. You can't carry someone forever without breaking yourself. So he adjusted. Support without control. Love without enabling. Presence without possession. Those boundaries didn't make him cold. They made him sustainable. Brittany noticed the shift as well. Their marriage settled into something quieter than romance arcs television prefers. It was built on routine, shared effort, shared meals measured with intention rather than guilt. They walked together, planned together, sat in silence without needing to fill it. And somewhere in that silence, Brittany began to imagine a different future, one where her body wasn't an obstacle but a collaborator. Her conversations about bariatric surgery weren't impulsive fantasies. They were careful, measured, filled with fear and hope in equal parts. She worried about recovery, about delays, about whether time would run out before she ever held a child of her own. Chris didn't rush to reassure her with empty optimism. He told her the truth. It would be hard. It would take time. There were no guarantees. But there was also possibility. And for the first time in years, possibility felt realistic instead of cruel. Publicly, Chris remained modest about his success. He didn't brand himself as a fitness guru. He didn't lecture followers. He shared when it felt right and stayed quiet when it didn't. That restraint only increased his credibility. Fans trusted him because he didn't perform health, he lived it. That trust followed him everywhere. At conventions, at meet and greets, In cameo messages sent late at night to strangers who needed encouragement from someone who had survived their fear. Chris didn't see himself as inspirational. But inspiration often looks like consistency to those who are still searching for hope. Season 7 closed without fanfare for him. No grand arc.
No triumphant montage.
And yet, when the credits rolled, Chris Combs was standing stronger than he'd ever been. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. He had outgrown the need for television to validate his progress. And in doing so, he became something the show could never fully capture. A man who didn't just lose weight. A man who reclaimed time. Time, once reclaimed, demanded intention. For Chris Combs, the days after Season 7 were no longer divided by filming schedules or production timelines. The cameras were gone, but the habits remained. Morning walks weren't for footage. They were for clarity. Evenings weren't about recovery from exertion. They were about maintaining balance. He had learned something essential through loss. Not just weight, but illusion. There was no finish line. No moment where discipline could relax permanently. Progress, he understood now, was not a victory lap. It was a maintenance contract with yourself, renewed daily. That mindset kept him grounded when rumors surfaced online. Fans speculated about his absence from major storylines. Comment sections questioned whether something was wrong. Others claimed producers had pushed him aside because his journey had become boring. Chris didn't argue. He smiled at the word boring. Boring meant stable. Boring meant healthy. Boring meant alive. Behind the scenes, he was still working, not chasing transformation but protecting it. His blood sugar levels remained controlled. Insulin no longer dominated his daily routine. Mobility, once a fragile achievement, became an expectation rather than a celebration. He could move without thinking. That freedom was intoxicating in its quietness. Brittany's journey mirrored his in subtler ways. While the public focused on speculation, pregnancy rumors, surgery whispers, she focused on strength, on stamina, on rebuilding her relationship with food without shame. They didn't announce plans. They lived them. At family gatherings, Chris noticed the shift in how others saw him. He wasn't the big brother trying. He was the proof that consistency works when motivation fails. Younger relatives watched him differently. Questions came softly now, cautiously, like requests for permission. How did you keep going when it got hard? What happens when you mess up? Do you ever want to quit? Chris answered honestly. All the time. But quitting stopped being an option when he realized what it cost. He thought often of his father, a man whose life had ended too early, whose story served as both warning and inheritance. That shadow never left him. It didn't paralyze him anymore. It propelled him. Every step forward was a refusal. Refusal to repeat the past. Refusal to surrender years he hadn't lived yet. Refusal to become a statistic. Public appearances became moments of affirmation rather than performance. At meet and greets, fans commented on his glow, his posture, the ease in his smile. They saw happiness without spectacle. That authenticity made him rare in reality television. On Cameo, his messages deepened. Less comedy, more connection. He spoke to people on the brink of giving up, not as a celebrity, but as someone who had stood on the edge himself and stepped back. You don't need perfect, he told them. You need tomorrow. The numbers reflected that connection. Ratings climbed. Requests poured in. His voice, steady and familiar, became a small lifeline for thousands he would never meet. And still, Chris remained private. He grieved quietly when Brittany mourned lost time. He celebrated quietly when her confidence grew. He stood quietly when Amy stumbled publicly again, refusing to join the noise that demanded judgment instead of understanding. Strength, he had learned, didn't require volume. As the months passed, the question shifted from what happened to Chris Combs after Season 7 to something more profound. What happens when someone stops needing the spotlight? The answer was unfolding slowly. And it was beautiful. Season 8 loomed like a distant weather front, visible, unavoidable, but no longer controlling the day-to-day rhythm of Chris Combs' life. For the first time since joining 1,000-Pound Sisters, the future didn't feel tethered to production schedules or storyline arcs. Whether the cameras returned or not, Chris had already crossed the most dangerous threshold of his journey, believing he deserved longevity. That belief reshaped everything. He woke earlier now, not because he had to, but because his body asked for movement. The stiffness that once defined his mornings had softened into a manageable hum. He stretched. He walked. He breathed in ways that once felt inaccessible to someone his size. These were quiet victories. Not the kind that trend online, but the kind that add years. Brittany noticed the change most during ordinary moments, grocery trips without exhaustion, laughter that didn't end in breathlessness, evenings where fatigue no longer dictated the mood of the room. Their marriage shifted from survival mode into something gentler, more spacious. They talked about the future without urgency. Not because they didn't want things, but because desperation no longer led the conversation. The baby rumors came and went like background noise. Chris learned to stop reading comment sections altogether. He had spent too many years letting outside voices define his worth. That chapter was closed. What mattered now was presence. At family gatherings, he became the anchor. When tensions flared between Tammy and Amy, words sharper than necessary, emotions spilling from old wounds, Chris stood steady.
He didn't take sides.
He slowed the room down. "You're both hurting," he'd say quietly. And hurting people yell. That calm wasn't accidental. It had been earned through pain, discipline, and humility. Tammy noticed it too. After her skin removal surgery, when the applause faded and reality settled in, she leaned on Chris more than ever. Not for advice, but for reassurance that the silence after transformation wasn't failure. Chris understood that silence. He had lived in it. He reminded her that change doesn't end applause, it ends chaos. And chaos, as addictive as it can be, is not peace. Away from the family drama, Chris continued showing up for strangers who felt seen through him. His cameo messages grew more personal, less scripted, more human. People didn't ask how much weight he lost anymore. They asked how he stayed sane, how he forgave himself for years lost, how he rebuilt confidence without becoming arrogant, how he stayed consistent when motivation disappeared. Chris answered each message the same way. "You don't wait to feel ready," he said. "You act tired. You act scared. You act anyway." That honesty separated him from most reality TV transformations. He wasn't selling a fantasy. He was documenting sustainability. When footage surfaced from the June 2025 meet and greet, fans noticed something different. Not just the weight loss, but the ease. The way he stood without hiding. The way Brittany smiled beside him, radiant and unguarded. They didn't look like people chasing redemption. They looked like people who had found it. And still, Chris refused to define himself by before and after photos. Because the hardest transformation had never been physical. It was mental. Letting go of the version of himself who believed health was punishment. Letting go of the idea that joy had to be earned through suffering. Letting go of the fear that stability meant stagnation. He wasn't afraid of being boring anymore. He was afraid of going backward. And that fear, quiet, disciplined, relentless, kept him moving forward. As summer settled over Kentucky, life slowed into a rhythm Chris Combs once believed he would never reach. Steady, intentional, quietly rewarding. There were no dramatic weigh-ins anymore. No doctors gasping at numbers. No tearful confessions in fluorescent-lit offices. Those moments had served their purpose, but Chris had moved beyond spectacle. What remained was maintenance, the most unglamorous, most difficult phase of any transformation. And the most important. He learned quickly that success wasn't loud. It whispered. It lived in routines that repeated even when no one was watching. In meals planned ahead of time. In saying no without resentment. In listening to his body, instead of punishing it. Some mornings, doubt crept in anyway. There were days his knees ached. Days old cravings resurfaced without warning. Days when progress felt fragile, like one wrong step could undo years of effort. But Chris no longer panicked when those thoughts arrived. He acknowledged them, then moved forward anyway. That was the difference now. He had stopped seeing setbacks as proof of failure and started seeing them as part of the terrain. Brittany mirrored that growth in her own way. Her transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional, internal, deeply personal. She carried herself differently now, no longer shrinking herself in rooms or deflecting attention with humor. When people complimented her, she accepted it without apology. They walked together in the evenings sometimes, not for cardio, not for milestones, just for connection. Conversations drifted from memories to possibilities, from laughter to silence, without discomfort. The question of children still lingered, unspoken but present. It wasn't avoidance, it was respect for timing, for healing, for honesty. Chris knew that forcing life forward had never worked before, so they let it unfold. Online, fans speculated endlessly. Some assumed Brittany had already undergone surgery. Others insisted a pregnancy announcement was imminent. Chris resisted the urge to clarify, explain, or correct. Not everything needed public validation. Instead, he focused on what he could control, showing up where he was invited, speaking honestly when asked, and protecting the quiet victories that didn't belong to anyone else. When he posted on Instagram, it wasn't curated perfection. It was real moments, a smile, a memory, a reminder that progress doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks peaceful. The love from fans remained constant. Messages poured in from people who didn't see him as a reality star, but as proof. Proof that change doesn't expire. That middle age doesn't mean middle opportunity. That consistency can outshine intensity. Chris read many of those messages late at night, sitting at the kitchen table long after the house had gone still. They grounded him. They reminded him why he stayed visible even when he could have stepped away. Because someone, somewhere, needed to see a version of success that didn't scream. As whispers of future seasons floated through fan forums and comment sections, Chris stayed neutral. If the cameras returned, he would welcome them. If they didn't, he would still wake up tomorrow and do the work. That was freedom.
Not fame.
Not praise. Not applause. Freedom was knowing that his life no longer paused when the show did. And for Chris Combs, once defined by fear, weight, and limitation, that realization was the greatest victory of all. Fall arrived without ceremony, just as Chris preferred it. The air cooled, the days shortened, and the noise around him softened into something manageable. This season always made him reflective. It reminded him of years spent avoiding mirrors, avoiding photographs, avoiding the future itself. Now, mirrors no longer frightened him. What surprised Chris most wasn't the physical freedom, it was the mental quiet. The absence of constant self-criticism. The relief of not negotiating with his body every moment of the day. He could simply exist. His mornings began earlier now. Not out of obligation, but out of habit. He liked the stillness before the world woke up. Coffee brewed slowly. A light stretch. Sometimes a walk if the weather allowed. These weren't fitness goals anymore. They were grounding rituals. Brittany often joined him, wrapped in a hoodie, hair still sleep-tousled. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they watched the sun lift itself over the trees, sharing silence that felt earned. The public still asked about weight, about numbers, about what's next. Chris answered carefully. He explained that staying where he was required more discipline than getting there. That losing weight had an endpoint, maintaining it did not. That people underestimated the courage it took to live in the middle instead of chasing extremes. Those answers resonated. Messages from men his age became more frequent. Fathers, grandfathers, workers with worn joints and limited time. People who had convinced themselves it was too late. Chris never told them it would be easy. He told them it was possible. That distinction mattered. Occasionally, old footage surfaced online, clips from early seasons when he struggled to stand, when breath came in shallow bursts, when hope looked like something borrowed instead of owned. Watching those moments now felt surreal, like viewing another lifetime. He didn't cringe. He felt compassion. Because that version of himself had survived long enough to become this one. Brittany continued exploring her own health goals privately. Whether surgery would ever happen remained undecided, and Chris supported that uncertainty fully. They had learned that pressure, even well-meaning, could fracture progress. Choice was power. At public events, fans often commented on how calm he seemed, how different his energy felt. They expected transformation to look dramatic, but what they noticed instead was steadiness. Chris smiled more easily now, laughed without catching his breath, listened without waiting to speak. That's what healing looked like. And when questions about children resurfaced, gentle, curious, sometimes invasive, Chris answered honestly. Life didn't always follow scripts. Dreams didn't disappear when timelines changed. They evolved. So did people. As the year edged toward its close, Chris felt something unfamiliar but welcome: contentment. Not the kind that dulls ambition, but the kind that anchors it. He still had goals, still had work to do, still had challenges ahead. But he no longer felt chased by them. He was walking at his own pace now. And for the first time in decades, that pace felt exactly right. Winter's chill arrived gradually, creeping into Dixon, Kentucky, until the air carried that crispness that made lungs ache pleasantly. Chris wrapped himself in a thick jacket and met Brittany at the local park for a brief walk. Snow had not yet fallen, but frost decorated the edges of leaves like delicate glass filigree. As they walked, Chris reflected on how far he had come, not just physically but emotionally. He remembered the nights when every step, every breath, every bite of food was a battle, when the mirror was a daily adversary, mocking him for choices he had already regretted. Now, those days felt like distant echoes, haunting but powerless. Brittany's presence was grounding. She laughed at his exaggerated gestures when he tried to kick a pile of leaves, and he laughed in return, free of shame. They didn't need to speak. Their silence was comfortable. It wasn't the silence of avoidance, but of understanding. Back at home, Chris maintained his daily routine. Workouts were shorter but more focused, emphasizing functional movement and strength rather than sheer calorie burn. He relished cooking with Brittany, experimenting with healthy meals that didn't feel like punishment but nourishment. They learned together, creating recipes that fueled their bodies while celebrating taste and joy. Social media remained a double-edged sword. Chris appreciated the connection with fans, but carefully curated what he shared. He posted candid updates, a photo of himself after a morning jog, a video laughing with Brittany, a snippet of advice for someone struggling with mobility. The comments flooded in, messages of encouragement and gratitude. People felt inspired not just by his weight loss, but by his consistency, his honesty, and his humility. Chris also began mentoring younger family members. His nephews and nieces looked up to him, not just for his physical changes, but for his resilience. He shared tips about health, shared moments of vulnerability, and demonstrated that setbacks were part of the journey, not the end of it. Occasionally, old fears resurfaced. Fear of regaining weight. Fear of letting life slip by. Fear of repeating past mistakes. Chris met those fears head-on, journaling them, speaking to Brittany, and reminding himself of the discipline and patience that had carried him this far. As the first snow threatened to dust the town, Chris found solace in small joys: warm tea, long conversations with Brittany, quiet evenings spent reading or journaling. Life wasn't perfect, but it was lived fully, consciously, and intentionally. He knew more challenges awaited. Life always does. But Chris no longer felt powerless. He had reclaimed himself, piece by piece, and in doing so, he had found something even more valuable than weight loss: the freedom to live authentically, with purpose and with love. Spring arrived in Dixon with a gentle warmth that seemed to breathe life into every corner of the town. Chris woke early one morning, sunlight spilling through his window, and felt a rare kind of excitement for the day ahead. He had scheduled a hike with Brittany and a few close friends, a way to celebrate their progress and reconnect with nature after months of indoor workouts and routines. The trail led them through rolling hills, past streams that gurgled playfully over rocks, and beneath towering oaks whose branches swayed like dancers in the morning breeze. Chris felt his lungs expand fully for the first time in years, unencumbered by the heaviness that had once weighed him down. Each step was a quiet triumph, a reminder that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. Brittany walked beside him, her laughter mingling with the wind. She had grown stronger alongside him, not just physically but in confidence and spirit. She spoke candidly about her plans for bariatric surgery, the careful preparation she was undertaking, and how excited she was for the potential of starting a family someday. Chris listened, absorbing her words and offering reassurance. Together, they discussed health goals, strategies, and dreams, their voices blending into the harmony of the forest. Returning from the hike, Chris documented the journey for his fans. A short video clip showed him pausing at the top of the hill, arms stretched wide as the sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. He spoke directly to his audience. This is what it's about: small steps, consistency, and never giving up on yourself. No matter how hard it gets, you're capable of amazing things. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from fans who were inspired by his journey, sharing their own struggles and triumphs. Chris felt a profound sense of purpose, realizing that his story was more than a personal victory. It was a beacon for others navigating similar paths. Later, Chris and Brittany attended a family gathering. Tammy, Amy, and the rest of the clan were there, celebrating milestones and sharing laughter. Chris felt a sense of normalcy and connection that had been hard to achieve during the height of the show's drama. Conversations flowed easily, and for once, the focus wasn't on weight or conflict, but on family bonds, shared memories, and the promise of brighter days. Evenings were quieter. Chris found solace in reflection and gratitude. He often journaled about his experiences, documenting challenges, successes, and the emotions that accompanied them. He recognized the importance of mental health alongside physical well-being and made time for meditation, breathing exercises, and occasional therapy sessions to maintain balance. Though life was not without setbacks, Chris approached each obstacle with a measured perspective. Plateaus in weight loss, days of fatigue, or minor injuries were seen as temporary, surmountable challenges rather than failures. This mindset became the foundation for his ongoing transformation, reinforcing his commitment to long-term health and fulfillment. Through all of it, Chris's relationship with Brittany flourished. Their partnership was built on mutual support, honesty, and shared ambition. Together, they navigated the complexities of public life, personal goals, and family responsibilities, emerging stronger and more united with each passing day. Chris's journey after season 7 was no longer just about weight loss. It was about reclaiming his life, nurturing meaningful relationships, and inspiring others to take control of their destinies, one step at a time. Summer arrived in Dixon with a brightness that seemed to awaken the town itself. Chris had started incorporating more structured workouts into his daily routine, blending cardio with strength training to build endurance and muscle tone. Early mornings were dedicated to brisk walks around the neighborhood, while afternoons sometimes included resistance bands or light weights at home. Brittany joined him whenever she could, and their shared commitment turned workouts into a source of connection and laughter. One particularly humid afternoon, Chris received an invitation to speak at a local health and wellness seminar. The event was designed to motivate individuals struggling with obesity and to provide practical advice on nutrition, exercise, and mindset. Chris hesitated at first. He was not accustomed to being in the spotlight without the cameras of 1,000-pound sisters. But he recognized the opportunity to make a difference beyond the television screen. On the day of the seminar, Chris stood in front of a room filled with eager attendees. Some faces mirrored the struggles he had once faced. Others simply sought inspiration. He shared his journey candidly: the gastric sleeve surgery, the early challenges with mobility, the emotional weight of self-doubt, and the steady, persistent steps toward health. He emphasized small, achievable goals and the importance of patience, acknowledging that transformation was a marathon rather than a sprint. The audience responded enthusiastically. Hands went up with questions about diet, workout routines, and maintaining motivation. Chris answered each one thoughtfully, drawing on both personal experience and the lessons learned from his family's journeys. Brittany watched from the side, beaming with pride. Seeing Chris confident, articulate, and fully in control of his story was a poignant reminder of how far he had come. After the seminar, Chris took a moment to reflect on his growth. Season 7 had been a whirlwind of emotions, But stepping away from the cameras allowed him to focus on the most important aspects of life: health, family, and self-respect. He realized that the attention he once craved from viewers had shifted into a desire for genuine fulfillment and lasting impact. Evenings in the Combs household were now calmer. Kris and Brittany spent time cooking healthy meals together, experimenting with recipes that were both nutritious and flavorful. Each dish was a celebration of their progress, a tangible representation of their discipline and creativity. The aroma of herbs and roasted vegetables filled the home, creating an atmosphere of comfort and accomplishment. Kris also reconnected with hobbies that had been neglected for years. He took long drives in his classic Corvette, revisited model car building, and occasionally went fishing with family members. These moments of joy reminded him that life was multifaceted, and personal growth was not confined to physical transformation alone. Social media remained a part of Kris's life, but in a more balanced way. He posted updates about his workouts, shared motivational insights, and occasionally interacted with fans who sought guidance or encouragement. The positive messages far outweighed any negative commentary, reinforcing his belief that sharing his story could have a tangible, uplifting effect on others. As the summer drew to a close, Kris felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had reclaimed control over his health, strengthened his relationships, and built a foundation for a future that prioritized well-being and happiness. Every challenge he overcame became a testament to perseverance, and every small victory reinforced the path he had chosen. Kris's post-season 7 journey was no longer just about losing weight. It was about embracing life, inspiring others, and nurturing the relationships that gave him purpose and joy. As autumn settled over Dixon, the changing colors of the leaves mirrored the transformations in Kris's own life. Each morning brought a renewed sense of purpose. He had developed a disciplined routine that balanced physical fitness, mental well-being, and family time. Brittany often joined him for walks in the Kris Bear, and their conversations ranged from future goals to light-hearted laughter, marking the deeper connection that had grown between them. Kris also began exploring mindfulness practices. Inspired by a suggestion from a friend, he started journaling each morning, noting not just his progress, but also his thoughts, feelings, and gratitude. He discovered that reflecting on daily accomplishments, even small ones, helped reinforce a positive mindset and reduce the anxiety that sometimes accompanied his weight loss journey. Meditation became part of his routine as well, a quiet half-hour in the morning that allowed him to set intentions and focus on what truly mattered. Despite the focus on his health and mental clarity, Kris remained deeply involved in his family. He often spent afternoons with his nephews and nieces, teaching them simple exercises or showing them new ways to be active while having fun. The joy of seeing the younger generation engage with movement, even in playful ways, reminded him of why he had committed to living a healthier, longer life. Kris also sought to give back to the community in meaningful ways. He volunteered at a local health fair, sharing his story and offering tips to those struggling with obesity. People approached him with questions, seeking advice on diet, exercise, and motivation. Kris listened patiently, offering encouragement and reassurance. For many, seeing someone who had faced similar challenges succeed was profoundly inspiring. In November, Kris and Brittany traveled briefly to visit family out of state. During the trip, Kris noticed how much more energy he had compared to previous years. Activities that had once been exhausting, walking through airports, climbing stairs, or navigating crowded events, were now manageable and, in some cases, enjoyable. Brittany remarked on how confident and vibrant he appeared, her pride evident in every glance. Back in Dixon, Kris continued to document his journey, not for fame, but to hold himself accountable. His Instagram posts showcased a balance between fitness updates, family moments, and reflections on personal growth. Fans and followers responded positively, celebrating his milestones and expressing admiration for his dedication. Kris realized that maintaining this balance was crucial. Social media could serve as motivation, but it would never replace the satisfaction of personal achievements. As the year drew to a close, Kris set new goals for himself. He wanted to increase his stamina, expand his strength training regimen, and maintain the weight he had worked so hard to lose. Beyond physical goals, he also focused on nurturing his relationships, pursuing hobbies that brought him joy, and deepening his connection with Brittany. These objectives were not driven by pressure or external expectations. They were a testament to his commitment to living a full, balanced life. By the time December arrived, Chris reflected on how far he had come since his first appearance on 1,000-Pound Sisters. He thought about the struggles, the surgeries, the setbacks, and the triumphs. The journey had been grueling, but it had also been profoundly transformative. He now understood that true success wasn't just about numbers on a scale. It was about health, happiness, and resilience. Chris felt ready for whatever the next chapter held. Whether it was continued fitness milestones, family celebrations, or new opportunities to inspire others, he approached the future with a sense of hope, purpose, and gratitude. His journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, he felt fully in control of his life and proud of the path he had chosen. With the new year on the horizon, Chris felt a renewed sense of motivation. He and Brittany had started planning small personal projects together, from home workouts to experimenting with healthier recipes. The kitchen became a place of creativity and experimentation, where Chris learned to cook meals that were both nutritious and flavorful. Brittany's enthusiasm was contagious, and the couple found joy in simple, shared routines that reinforced their bond. Chris also began mentoring others more formally. He joined a local support group for individuals facing obesity and shared his experiences, offering practical tips on nutrition, mental resilience, and exercise. The sessions were deeply rewarding. Seeing attendees gain confidence and take their first steps toward change reminded Chris of his own journey. He realized that every story of transformation he helped foster, no matter how small, contributed to a ripple effect of positivity in his community. Amid these personal developments, Chris's health continued to improve. Regular checkups showed stable blood sugar levels and lower blood pressure. His mobility was significantly enhanced, and he no longer relied on insulin shots daily. Even small victories, like being able to walk longer distances without fatigue or take part in spontaneous family activities, brought a profound sense of accomplishment. Social media remained a platform where Chris balanced authenticity with inspiration. His posts were no longer solely about weight loss. They highlighted lifestyle changes, mental wellness, and the importance of community support. Fans responded with messages of gratitude, often sharing how Chris's transparency had motivated them to embark on their own health journeys. He realized that influence was not about fame. It was about connection, empathy, and encouragement. Chris and Brittany also explored hobbies that had long been sidelined. Hiking, photography, and even gardening became shared passions, offering both physical activity and moments of mindfulness. Brittany's excitement for these new endeavors strengthened their relationship, fostering an environment of support and shared growth. By spring, Chris had gained a new perspective on his journey. The focus shifted from achieving a specific number on the scale to celebrating sustainable, long-term health and well-being. He set goals not just for weight maintenance but for overall vitality, improving cardiovascular health, building muscle strength, and continuing emotional and mental growth. Family remained at the heart of Chris's life. Regular gatherings with Tammy, Amy, and the extended Slatton family offered moments of joy, laughter, and sometimes gentle reminders of past challenges. These interactions reinforce the importance of relationships and the value of shared experiences, both joyful and difficult. Chris also began preparing for future opportunities outside of reality television. He explored fitness coaching certifications, aiming to turn his personal transformation into a way to help others more formally. He envisioned workshops, online programs, and community events that could reach a wider audience. This ambition, once distant, now seemed achievable thanks to the discipline, confidence, and knowledge he had cultivated over the years. By mid-year, Chris and Brittany had established routines that balanced work, personal growth, and shared hobbies. Their relationship grew stronger with each passing day, grounded in mutual respect, shared experiences, and a commitment to support one another. Chris felt proud not just of his physical transformation, but of the emotional resilience, self-discipline, and compassion he had developed along the way. As the months progressed, Chris reflected on the journey that had begun years ago with uncertainty and struggle. From the early days of morbid obesity to the steady, disciplined work that brought him health, happiness, and purpose, his story was one of perseverance. He understood that transformation was not just a physical process. It was a holistic journey encompassing mind, body, and spirit. As the year drew to a close, Chris took stock of how far he had come. He stood in his living room, watching Brittany play with their friends' children, laughter echoing around him. The sense of accomplishment he felt wasn't just about weight loss. It was about reclaiming control over his life, embracing responsibility, and nurturing meaningful connections. He realized that every choice he had made, every small step toward health, had led to a profound transformation, not only in his body but in his confidence, relationships, and purpose. Chris reflected on the highs and lows of the 1,000-pound sister's journey. The public scrutiny, the struggles with mobility, and the personal health scares could have been overwhelming, yet they became catalysts for growth. He understood now that his story wasn't simply about weight loss or television appearances. It was about resilience, adaptation, and hope. Each setback had taught him lessons about perseverance, patience, and self-compassion, lessons he now shared openly with his followers and loved ones. Brittany had become his anchor. Together, they had created a life that prioritized wellness, emotional balance, and shared joy. While the dream of starting a family remained on the horizon, they were building a foundation grounded in love, health, and mutual support. Chris recognized that patience and preparation were as important as ambition. Their shared commitment to each other and their goals strengthened daily, and the couple celebrated small victories as milestones toward the life they envisioned. Chris's presence in the fitness and reality TV communities had grown more meaningful. Gone were the days when attention was driven solely by shock or drama. Now, fans admired him for authenticity, dedication, and the inspiring example he set. Cameo messages, Instagram updates, and public appearances had become opportunities not only to entertain but to educate, uplift, and motivate. He found joy in connecting with people who were struggling, offering encouragement drawn from personal experience. By late 2025, Chris had embraced a new rhythm of life. Mornings began with a mix of stretching, light cardio, and mindful reflection. Meals were thoughtfully prepared, balancing taste and nutrition, often shared with Brittany as a ritual of connection. Afternoons were reserved for activities that nurtured the mind and body, workshops, journaling, or community involvement, while evenings were for family, conversation, and rest. This structure wasn't restrictive. It was empowering, giving Chris a sense of stability and accomplishment he had never before experienced. Looking toward the future, Chris had clear goals. Beyond maintaining his health, he wanted to inspire others through public speaking, coaching, and potentially writing about his journey. He envisioned programs tailored for individuals battling obesity, emphasizing realistic progress, mental health, and long-term wellness. He hoped to create spaces where people could feel supported without judgment, understanding that transformation required more than motivation. It required guidance, community, and persistence. Chris also reflected on his personal growth. He had learned patience, emotional intelligence, and resilience. He valued relationships over fleeting validation and had cultivated a sense of self-worth independent of public perception. His journey underscored that transformation is holistic, encompassing mind, body, and spirit. Every achievement, every lesson, every moment of doubt and triumph had contributed to the person he was becoming. As the final weeks of 2025 arrived, Chris and Brittany celebrated quietly at home. They reminisced about past struggles, laughed about small victories, and planned for the future with optimism. Chris felt a profound sense of gratitude for his health, his family, and the opportunity to influence others positively. He understood that life would continue to present challenges, but he now possessed the tools, mindset, and support to meet them with strength and grace. In the quiet moments before bed, Chris reflected on the journey that had started years ago with uncertainty and fear. From morbid obesity to a life filled with purpose, health, and meaningful connections, the transformation was remarkable. More than the weight lost, it was the life gained, the resilience, confidence, and fulfillment that now defined him. With a contented sigh, Chris set his intentions for the coming year. Continue to grow, inspire, and cherish every moment with Brittany, family, and friends. He was no longer just the reality TV star viewers had once known. He had become a symbol of perseverance, authenticity, and hope. And as he drifted to sleep that night, Chris Combs knew one thing for certain. His journey wasn't over. It was just entering its most meaningful chapter yet.